Perfect. Welcome, everybody. This is the first of a series of videos that the ASI national team's putting together to kind of just chat through the snowboard fundamentals and talk about, what they mean to us, as we're snowboarding, as we're teaching. And we're going to jump into this video series and really start to break them down because a lot of people are starting to develop ideas about them. And as a team, we've talked through them and we work through them, but we want to kind of do some things where we jump on here and really kind of just have some raw conversation about them. And so this is your ASI snowboard team, and I'm going to let people kind of go around the horn and introduce themselves, and then we're going to kick it off tonight. So with that being said, I'm Brian Donovan with your ASI snowboard team.
Lyndsey Stevens.
Hey guys, Tony Macri.
Matt Larson.
Amy Bailey.
Stephanie Wilkerson.
Chris Rogers.
Doc Hewitt here.
Eric Rolls.
Awesome. And tonight we're jumping it off with this first call, and we're going to be talking about the fundamental that's control the board's tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation. And there's some big words in there. And so I'm just going to let it roll. And if somebody wants to kind of kick it off, let's go and we'll see where it goes.
Cool. Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think about, like, when I think about this fundamental, I think about how we create tilt on our snowboard. And again, inclination and angulation is also a little bit of an outcome of creating flexion extension and moving our body and moving our joints. So it's more in, like, I look at how we increase and decrease the tilt on our snowboard, beginner levels all the way through. And something that, occurred to me, like today I was doing a level 1 exam over in Vail, and from a very beginning element where we're talking about our basic stance, and today I introduced that basic stance, and I talked about a basic stance on a toe edge and a basic stance on our heel edge, because we very rarely ride our board absolutely flat. And there we were talking about how we manage that tilt and how we balance over it. And it's interesting, when we talk about kind of moving from the board all the way up and starting with the ankles and then the knees and then the hips and kind of matching that. And one thing that I like to have people kind of go out and as they're riding is, as you guys are doing, whether it's a skidded turn or a carved turn, and you're creating angles through your body, right? That angulation. Think about what joint changes the most when you go from toe edge to heel edge. Is it the ankles? Is it the knees? Or is it the hips? And it was great, as people were kind of working through that, and they kind of came to that consensus that it's obviously the hips. We're extending our hips to that toe edge and then flexing our hips on that heel edge, where both of the other joints were kind of creating a little bit more flexion primarily.
Just stacking on top of flexion there, Tony. I think about as I'm looking to either create angles or I may be inclinating comparative to where I am as far as being taller or short, brings some different outcomes out there. And as riding around and exploring those, like if I was shorter, what does it look like as I'm inclinating or creating those angles versus if I'm taller? Because there's lots of movement patterns that we might utilize as we transition from one edge to the other, where we start putting those angles into action.
I'm gonna jump in and I'm gonna kind of roll with that. Is, I think this fundamental is there's 4 really important words, right? So you got tilt, which is a pretty important word. That's how the snowboard is interacting with the snow. And then you got combination, which is an important word. You got inclination, you got angulation. And so, when I think about this one, I think of tilt, to kind of speak to Tony's point, is, how is the board relative to the snow? And Tony's talking about, being on toe edge versus heel edge and what the stance looks like. And I like to think of that, but I also like to think of, like, flat board is definitely still a version of tilt, right? Managing a flat board is still tilt to some extent. And then, like, that idea of combination to me, like, we'll kind of come back to it, but, inclination is that, like, leaning your body relative to the mountain or relative to the slope or relative to the surface. And then angulation is creating angles with the body to kind of balance over the board as we're doing it. But I really seldom ever think that we just isolate them and live in zones. We're not just totally leaning and not creating any angles with the body. And we're very seldom just creating angles with the body and riding a flat board, right? Like we still have to put in some lean into it to actually get the board up on an edge and actually get it to carve and get it to tilt. And so, it's fun to play with those extremes of isolating them, but at the same time, combination is such a key word here as we kind of mesh them together to get different outcomes, kind of to what Larson's speaking to. And so, really just unpack this one. There's some pretty powerful words that build into the concepts we're talking about.
Yeah, Brian, with what you're saying, I'm just thinking about a student I was working with last week. He was really wanting to work on like a toe side hand drag Euro carve. And I was just noticing like how intense the inclination and the angulation movements had to be to create that tilt and be able to manage that level of tilt. Going from a pretty extreme angulation to a pretty extreme inclination and then back again. It really highlights this fundamental that we're discussing tonight.
Yeah, Lyndsey, one of the things that you just said, and it kind of hits me in the head when I think of this one, is I think of like motorcycle racing. And I think of those people that see like high-end motorcycle racing on TV and they see like that person like super leaned over, dragging their knee and like their like elbows are like almost on the pavement. And then you see somebody trying to do that and they're like, bike is totally upright and they're like hanging off the side of it. And what they're doing has no real purpose, but they like think they're in the position to be like mimicking their motorcycle race like icon. Or that person who's like full tilted the sport bike over, but they're like totally upright over top of it and they're using the whole bike to get it. And it's kind of cool. Like what you're talking about is, purposeful amounts of what we're trying to do to actually get something to happen, as opposed to just like way bending over, trying to get as close to snow as possible, but like actually not getting the board to carve or not getting the board up on edge or just the opposite. So I think it's pretty funny.
I have a story to share about what happens when you're not using the combination. I basically blew up on the hill 3 times today. I had my hard boot set up, so got my forward stance like this, and if there was a moment where, say, I was fully extended and really limited my ability to create angles, all I could do was inclinate. Oh boy, not a lot of forgiveness there. It's a good time. I think it was entertaining for some people.
Yeah, I mean, it just points out that the farther your center mass is from your board, if you're inclining a lot, it's harder to recover too. Mm-hmm. Where you look at some images where somebody is really stacked and more vertical over their board, they have more options at that point. If you're really committed and angulated and you're building up a lot of that pressure and you need to make a quick move, that can be challenging for sure. Donovan, I love how you bring up that focus around the combination, because it truly is that blend of the two and trying to figure out how much to do of each. When I think about inclination, I think about that being a position relative to the slope. And I think that makes it kind of unique amongst these fundamentals, is that it's relative to something else exterior, something not within our body or attached to our body. And it's an interesting one to self-diagnose sometimes, because you may not be able to see that distance of your body to the slope. This one's a good one to ask a friend to take a look and see where your body is in relative to the slope. I mean, we can get a general idea, but it's good to get someone else to have eyes on it and to see how close you are to the slope.
I'm having a cool thought about what does this fundamental look like for the beginner lesson, and that classic image that you see of someone new to the concept of turning a snowboard, and when they go to that inclination move, the things that happen to them, that we see them become more unstable or maybe even fall over. And that component, again, circling right back to combination, we got to have that other piece there for them to be successful. So I think that's a really cool component to just be aware of when so many of our lessons are at that beginner level.
Yeah.
Even at the most basic level there, Matt, like in a heel side slip, that for that student in their very first heel side slip, and you're watching them manage tilt, right? And they're trying to find that balance of leading their body or using different joints. And you see, people slip out on their heel edge or catch their opposite edge. And like learning that balance is so obvious in the beginner lesson. I think this fundamental gets pigeonholed into carving way too easily. People talk about tilt and they immediately think of like high edge angle ripping through the snow. And really anytime we're turning, we're controlling tilt to be able to get that outcome of that skidded turn, right? And it takes the right amount of tilt at the right time. Too much tilt, you're going to build up pressure and get some shatter through the end. Too little, you're going to slip out. Like all of those dynamics is really show up even from day one in the heel side slip.
Yeah, you just got me thinking about the students that get really low. They're creating a lot of angulation, but there's just no tilt, and they're just sliding, trying to heel slip or something, and they're just sliding with a flat base, just cruising down the hill really fast because they're unable to tilt the board because they're not combining the angulation with the inclination.
Yeah, those are two. You guys brought up two things that are just like kind of hit me as light bulbs. And Lyndsey, that one is, like the difference between a person in that beginner day one lesson dragging a hand because they're just trying to get close to the ground, and then that person who's dragging a hand super laid out, in this like awesome, powerful turn on steep terrain or something. Way different. Like the outcome of dragging the hand is very similar, but with way different body positions to get there and way different outcomes in the board. And then Rogers, what you're talking about, I think is super powerful, right? Like that, we've all seen it, that day one lesson who can't really figure out how to just regulate edge angle, and they're like ramming it on and releasing it, ramming it on and releasing it. And it's like that moment where we're just waiting for, either to fall back and fall on your butt or to have it like drop and then catch an edge. And it's really figuring out how to get the right amount of flexion in the ankle, get the right bend in the knees and the hips to be balanced over the edge, to then find that sweet spot of actually creating edge angle, which is tilt. And it has nothing to do with carving. It literally can just be almost trying to just stand still for that person. And that's a really cool concept.
It makes me think about like when you get that person on their toe side for the first time and they're having that like really snappy, boards coming up high, boards hitting the ground again. And then you find out that they're like, rolls. They're like standing on their tiptoes rather than like relaxing their ankle and sinking their shins into the toe or the boot. And sometimes figuring that out in your lesson, you're like, you have to find out what muscles are firing, where they're getting tired before you can figure out, how their foot's actually making that angle happen, rather than, a fast ankle move to make that snap versus calming it down and making it more of an inclination move.
Yeah, that's real cool. Like, I think it's real obvious, especially at those beginner levels. Like we're seeing that, like, like rocking the boat as they're doing their heel side slip or toe side slip, kind of like you're talking about. It's also interesting, as we start moving up into more of the intermediate riders, just to start exploring the different ways we create that tilt. Like some things that I do that I like to play around with is just get people get on a really flat run and point the board down the hill and have them like straighten up their knees, straighten up their hips and stuff, and just go up on their tippy toes and then pull their toes up. So they're just rocking from edge to edge, only using their ankles, and just like have them feel like how quick the action versus reaction is, right? The ankle joint is so quick, but it's so not stable. To your point, Amy, when we get up on that ankle joint, we're opening that ankle joint, and then have people like try doing it just through the knees and try doing it more through the hips. And it's really funny. The one thing that we don't talk about all the time is how people use their spine as well to make subtle adjustments. And it's more of that, like, we have like the ankles at the bottom of the body that make those fine motor skills kind of down in to create that tilt. But we also have, a little bit of spine flexion as well to make subtle adjustments as well to kind of almost sometimes counteract some of the stuff that we do. Like, for example, a good example of that would be like when you see somebody doing like an MJ or something like that on a box, a real high level move, and they have to counter the upper body with the lower body. And there's definitely a lot of stuff happening in the ankles, knees, and hips, but there's also some spine action in there as well that I think sometimes gets overlooked.
Tony, you brought up MJ's on a box, and I was just thinking many of our most dramatic falls that you see snowboarding are related to controlling tilt, whether that's on a box. You think about like somebody learning their first 50-50 and not keeping the board, not reducing tilt, right? Not controlling their tilt to keep the board flat, and they slide out one side or another, or onto like board slides onto a down rail where you don't get on flat and the board slides out from underneath you. But even in the beginner zone, those edge catch, right? Not controlling tilt in a heel side slip or a floating leaf or even a basic turn, letting the board go flat at the wrong time, catching that downhill edge. We've all seen it in students. Many of us have had it happen to ourselves as well. You definitely get some with some of the other fundamentals, maybe an accidental lame dog, but from not controlling pressure along the length of the board, but certainly in inclination, angulation to affect tilt. This is like, it's an area where ineffectively controlling tilt can definitely be a major day ender.
This is one that I knew the least about when we were exploring different concepts for the fundamentals. This is one that I've had to really wrap my head around, because these terms get misused: inclination, angulation, and then you talk about, Brian, you said combination, and it's really interesting. This is the one that I had to really think about the most and really get my head wrapped around. And now it's like my main go-to. I'm so sold on it. I know how important it is. And I know it can be confused with pressure along or across the width of the board. We should hit that at some point. But as I've been working on this in my own riding, I think about, riding steeps, and when I'm inclined into the hill too much, particularly on my heel side, and I start to get that chatter, or maybe the going to the toe side is really delayed and I have to use some shoulder to get the board to come around because I'm too far on the inside of the turn. I've been playing around with, I found two things that really helped me figure out how to reduce my inclination. Kind of tying it back a little bit to, I don't always know like how far I'm leaning into the hill. Like I can't get an outside perspective of that space. And I can feel the pressure building up on my heel edge at the bottom of the turn. And that's when I know, but it's too late. It's like too late by then. So what I've been doing is from toe to heel, I've been really focused on using twist. And that's allowed me to stay right over my snowboard. So instead of dropping the hip down into the turn to create twist and then bringing the board around, I've created both angulation and inclination into the hill, which has created a lot of pressure at the bottom of that turn, particularly in steeps. But when I twist using my ankles, I have to stay right over top of the board, and the board reacts and it pivots nicely without having to create that leverage from my hip. And the other one that I discovered more recently is really focusing on turning the legs and not the pelvis. The pelvis can rotate and the femurs will turn inside the pelvis. But what I found most effective is to turn the femurs in the pelvis by moving the legs. And so this has kept my hip stable, and it's allowed me to steer the board around with the lower body, using the knee, to track towards that, pivot, to make the board pivot. So if I really want to get it around a lot and quick, I'll keep my pelvis stable and then steer with the knee, which will turn the femur inside the pelvis. Those times when I really turn my pelvis first are the times I'll likely be too inclined because I'll get too far on the inside of the turn. And so what I've done is I've asked people to say, hey, watch my toe to heel. If you see my pelvis moving first, tell me. If you see my leg moving first, tell me. And I've been really trying to focus on so I can be aware of that. So twisting the board with the ankles, as well as, moving the leg inside at the femur, where the femur meets the pelvis. Does that make sense? Like I've been geeking out in my head about it and trying to work on it.
That was so nerdy.
It changed my riding. I'm telling you, it changed my riding, and I've been focusing on it, switch and steeps, and it's been awesome. Like I know when I'm doing it.
Cue the video of these examples right now.
I know. I wanted to get some stills of it. Maybe we'll get some videos of it. But
I think that's cool how you talked about it in relation to terrain. You know, you have your board, and when the terrain pitch is changing, it changes the angle of the board. To that point, like that segues real nicely to something that I've been playing with early season at Copper. Like our half pipe just opened, and I've been playing around with obviously flattening the board against the wall. And obviously you take the whole thing that you're talking about, and you're on steeps, and now the same thing, I'm on like a steep wall and getting that board flat on that wall is all about perpendicularity, right? Kind of as we're going up, we're trying to get here versus kind of being here and like getting tall and then scraping down the wall. Anybody who's ridden pipe and comes down at the bottom of the pipe is like, oh, that pipe is too icy. And you're like, why are you so high up on your edge? Right. So thinking about trying to get that board flat. And even if you don't have a pipe, going on like a cat road and getting on the wall and trying to spray snow up the wall sort of thing and trying to get your board flat and getting on that downhill edge, all that sort of stuff is really interesting to how we manipulate our lower body to get on the edge or to your point, kind of flattening a little bit, whether it's a rotational move there or whether it's, how you get your board under your CM to kind of flatten a little bit. Super, super cool. So many different applications on the hill, to Roger's point with getting on metal and plastic and then the steeps and the pipe as well. So it's really cool.
I'll just link those, what you're saying and what Rolls you're saying is in my riding when I'm, on something steep or even in the pipe, and both, I just think about, am I over top of my edges and am I pushing my board into the mountain or into the wall, or am I leaning towards the mountain and is my board kind of getting out away from me a little bit? And I can almost always describe the sensations I'm getting, how much control or grip or lack of grip and chatter I'm getting. And I can come back to, am I creating some angles and am I over top of the edge pushing it into the mountain, or am I leaned in and is the edge kind of down below me? And am I riding the edge a little bit less, purposefully? And therefore, it's fun as hell to do it, but there's moments where it gets away. And if I'm too lean in, whether it's the pipe or on something steep, if I'm not over top of it, I'm going to lose a little bit of grip at some point and it's going to be hard to recover. And so in my riding, I can almost always come back to, whether it's an error or whether it's a really rad sensation of, am I over top of the edge pushing into the mountain, or am I leaning towards the mountain and the board getting away from me a little bit?
Donovan, I think that's a cool kind of observation there and sort of where my head goes. And kind of, we're talking a lot about sort of, steeps or pipe or freestyle and kind of being efficient and kind of, in that recovery position. But I don't know, I've been kind of thinking the opposite when I've been out there playing around, goofing around, letting it get a little bit of loose. Right. And that sensation that you're talking about of kind of letting that board kind of get out there and sort of ride the edge a little bit. And I'd love to hear from the crew. Maybe we don't have to dork out as much as Rollsy did and get super tech, but maybe, as we all kind of chase that, that belly carb or dragging your butt in the snow, what are the rest of you guys thinking about to get that, hyper inclinated position where you're really getting stretched way out there? What do you guys think about to find success in that little style of carving?
I think, oh, go ahead, Rosie.
No.
I think Brian said something really important at the beginning, which is the combination word. And it's really easy to take a still image of a Euro carve or of any carve, but you can describe how much tilt there is, how much inclination, how much the body is inclined into the slope, and how much angulation there is in the body. And if you look at a really laid out Euro carve, that's very little angulation, a lot of inclination, a lot of tilt. But to get into that position, I find it, and so looking at combination as a different way in terms of movement through time in the initiation, control, and finish that turn, it might look very different. And so I use a lot of flexion in the initiation of that Euro carve. And when I'm actually tipping the snowboard over, I'm very close to the snowboard, and then I'm extending away from the snowboard, actually pushing my center mass into the center of the turn and resulting in a very laid out Euro carve position, which then has that very inclined, very little angulation look. But it takes that combination to get you into it effectively and to get out of it effectively, right? You can't just, it's much more difficult to just stand back out of that. You got to be moving pretty hot to stand back out of that without flexing again to get back into that position.
Yeah, I like that, Rogers. And it depends a lot on snow conditions and different factors of what kind of equipment you're on. Like a hard boot, you can tip it right over a lot faster than, a really soft setup and stuff. And I was thinking about that recently. Somebody sent me a video. I've been trying to get better at the like heel side layout carve. And I've been getting like as low as I can at the start of the turn to get into that. Or somebody sent me a video the other day of Stale Sambeck at the bottom of his I don't know, slope run or pipe run maybe, but just like fully just laid it right over, like did not get low first, and it was gorgeous. So now I'm like, oh man, I gotta go try that out too and see if that's just gonna hurt or like how he did that. But it's pretty cool that there's so many variations of how you can do it and how you can make it look good.
Amy, that's so awesome to hear you say, right? Because we were kind of laying out all these snowboard fundamentals. I think that's the whole point. Like, there's no right or wrong answer, right? You can just kind of dial those knobs up or down, and you can do it Stolly style if you want, or you can get real small going into the carve. And one way isn't necessarily more correct than the other. So I don't know. I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah,
the other place you see that is like the bottom of a high speed, super deep, like Alaska spine line pow turn, right? Where you're able to just fully bank into it and come out. And like overall, it's a very similar position to a Euro carve, but doing it, I mean, almost standing up on the hill there, so steep. But that similar look to Stale and that heel side one.
Well,
Yeah, it's interesting, Chuck, when you're mentioning that, like what we do and stuff like that. I also think about a lot of times people we don't think about how we set up our board, and we talk about like bevel and stuff and utilizing things like that and creating different bevel on our board to allow us to get it out and away from us a little bit. When I bring my board in the shop, I always ask for a 2 base and a 2 side bevel, and they look at me like I'm crazy. And my style of riding, I like to ride a little bit lower and get the board out away from me, where some people don't like that. They want it to hook up earlier. So getting, especially in the hard plates and stuff like that, the Larson you're talking about, like that, traditionally those sorts of boards have a lot less base bevel on them, and you can it hooks up a little bit quicker and stuff like that. And it's, to your point, it's pretty scary sometimes.
Yeah.
But yeah, just playing around with and riding different bevels on your board will definitely have a big effect on when you get that bite and how far you get it out away from you before it bites.
We were just doing some tuning a couple nights ago, actually put a 0.75 on the base and then 3 on the side. And oh, wow.
Yeah.
Man, it'll hold on. I tell you that. Buddy, he was talking about going 4 degrees or even 5. And yeah, I didn't do that. I didn't do that. 3's plenty for all of y'all out there. 3's plenty on the side.
Hope you got some body armor and maybe a full face helmet with an angles like that.
That's a world I do not play with at all, with like what my edge stuff's at. Like, I just don't pay attention to it. But something I did play around with a group the other day is getting like tipping on the edge at a really slow speed and just kind of feeling out your own board and what that side cut does for you, and starting to get used to your own equipment and learning your own stuff, whether it's on a very technical level or just, feeling it and having no idea what's actually going on down there. Everybody can gain that experience on their own.
And that could be really hard too. Going super slow on green terrain.
Yeah.
Carving. I mean, talk about trying to find that sweet spot of combination. You really got to be on top of that edge. You incline too much, you're going to just slow motion tip over.
Yep.
You're too flexed, you may not get the edge angle. So that's sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a group that was heading to their level 1. We did it Friday. They're heading to their level 1 on Saturday, and they were all trying to get a little bit more grip out of their board and carving. So we, took it to an extreme to feel out what's going on and get them to feel those sensations.
What's crazy about that, though, is that I also use that as an activity at level 3 exams. I'll put candidates on green terrain and I'll say, let's do some high edge angle, slow speed carve turns.
Yes.
And I don't want to see a lot of the herky jerky, like recovery moves. I want to see purposeful.
I had a lot of herky jerky going on.
To like balance. And that is an activity you can do with folks going to a level 1, and that's an activity that you can do to see who's really aware of body position and how it balances you or gets you out of balance, at a really high level of riding. So super rad activity.
I mean, even at the very base level, like if you've got a big flat spot that gets groomed at your mountain, taking your board off and tipping it on edge and having, like I've done this at level 1s before, where people are struggling with carving, tip the board on edge and run it in a circle, like see what that side cut looks like before you even decamber it, right? So it's not the true shape of a carve, but letting people see how that edge bites into the snow and how that affects the radius of the turn like anything you can do to open people's eyes to how that relationship between edge angle, side cut, like different equipment, how that's going to bite into the snow differently, how that's going to look different, how that's going to feel different on any kind of equipment. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that they care so much about that on the ski side of things. Like, they have a different ski for a GS course versus slalom course, and that's all to do with side cut radius, I believe. And that's something that we don't often think about on snowboards.
Hey, what are your preferences as far as using forward lean as a tool in creating tilt? So I definitely heard people pretty passionate about it because it can be a cool lever in addition to just pulling your toes away from the snow to really bank on and get that heel edge to bite. And some people leave it pretty open.
I like to use technology however I can to maximize my abilities. My name's Eric. That's what I do. I like forward lean anonymous here. Just a F2.
Okay.
Not extreme, but that's my story.
I think that's something that can be very easily overdone, especially with students and their boards. And it creates kind of a hindrance sometimes. So I think being very careful and vigilant about how much you put on there is key as far as that goes.
I'd like to confess here. I think I got an F4. Oh, it's all blurry.
Blurred out.
Wow.
Yeah,
you should keep
because
that
it's
blurred.
F4. That's why it's blurred out.
Censor that. Yep.
So Steph, I'm going to jump on that though, because I think you're correct. I think there's a lot that goes into it, right? Like there are boots that have forward lean built right into the boot. And so that person they might be like already kind of rocked forward before you even put them in a binding. And then taking a look, like to go to what Larson just said, is before I even think about tilt when it comes to forward lean, I think about just what is the angle of like the tib and fib and where's the knee in relation to the foot, and like what position does you just put your lower leg in, standing in a binding as you ramp up forward lean or ramp it back, right? And I think it's just, if you watch somebody walk towards you and then all of a sudden you put them in a binding with forward lean that doesn't match where their normal stance is, like sure, you might be able to help them get some performance down the road, but they might have to kind of relearn how their ankles and knees flex just to be balanced. And so I think it's super important that we kind of just take the whole visual of how they stand in their boots, how we stand in our boots, and what we want to get out of it. And I'll also say, like, I'm a forward lean junkie, but I also do it on purpose because I like how it gets my knees into certain positions that help me. But I think it's that whole package, really, like how's it all kind of go into the recipe of ankle, knee, and how the lower leg sits with the forward lean.
I'll chime in on the other end of the scale. Anybody who's looked at my setup, 0 forward lean. Obviously, to Donovan's point, most gear nowadays comes with a stock forward lean built in, even before you start adding it. My opinion on the forward lean is like, the idea of forward lean, in my opinion, is to get our center of mass centered between the toe and heel edge, so that we get equal timing movements to the toe and equal timing movements to the heel. To Stephanie's point, too much forward lean cranks us over the toe edge, and then our heel hooks up real quick, and then we're just hanging out over our toe edge. But yeah, I ride a softer boot, and anybody who rides with me, I ride a little bit more flexed anyway, so I don't need extra effort to flex me for sure. But to that point, my ankles at the end of the season get a little bit sore and stuff like that because I'm doing all the effort myself, and I'm not utilizing technology like rolls. So maybe I should get smarter and not work so hard. But yeah, on the flip side of that, then I have a little bit more range in which I can make adjustments to save myself in sketchy rail situations. So I can save myself a little bit in that regard. But again, to each their own, and the beautiful thing about those adjustments, in my opinion, it's all about different body types and how we stand. You can watch to Donovan's point, when somebody walks, sometimes people walk and their heel doesn't touch the ground as much, and they walk on the balls of their feet or on their toes a little bit. And you got to take that into consideration. And you can even look at somebody's shoes sometimes, if you're with them in a rental shop, and see how their shoe is wearing on the bottom to get an idea how they're going to be moving and their tendency and movements when they get in their snowboards.
I'll throw a little caveat on this, and then I'll kind of leave it. The whole forward lean thing. I definitely like to roll a little bit of forward lean on my setup, but I'm real particular about what bindings I have that forward lean on. And if it's a high back that's too stiff or even a little bit too tall, I don't like it. I like having it's usually like F3 or so on the Malavita bindings. Are pretty soft because you can flex through that forward lean a fair bit. Versus if you take like a cartel or something that's a little bit stiffer, you're going to hit that high back and you're not going to be able to move through it quite as much. So kind of to Tony's point, kind of to Roll's point, like I like to use that technology, but I like to have something with a little bit of give, and it's not going to, be locked up against the back of my boot as soon as I contact it.
Chuck, how much forward lean are you using on your snow skate?
Snow skate's a whole nother ball game. That's all ankles all day long. But it's interesting, right? Because I taught a kid a couple days ago who had a real skateboard background. And, it's real interesting as we talk about inclination, angulation, right? He really wanted to be over the top of the snowboard all the time. And I was trying to use forward lean as a little bit of a tool, right, to help him start to get that board on edge a little bit more. And he just would have none of it. He was in the Tony camp. He didn't want any forward lean. And it was really interesting where I would turn his forward lean up and he would get worse. And I would turn it back down, and then he would pick right back up where we left off. So, it's, to Tony's point again, it's kind of, watching how people move and where they're comfortable are, and kind of playing off their strengths instead of trying to force them into one particular way to do things.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because I've actually worked with some students where I will go a little over the top with the forward lean, and not for a long time. I don't want to punish anybody, but just letting them try it out for a run and seeing what happens when you take it off for that next run, seeing the understanding of body position that comes through. And, sometimes it's like an aha moment for that student to understand where they have to position themselves to be able to create that tilt.
Lyndsey, that's really rad, because the thing I'm hearing from Chuck, I'm hearing from you, is just there's not a perfect setup that comes out of the rental shop or out of your local board shop that's going to be the best for all of us, right? We need to pay attention to what the person is and how they are set up and how they move and what their body looks like and how it's shaped and how their joints move and what their background is. If they're a skater and they're used to being right on top of their deck, as opposed to somebody that maybe surfs and they're used to being kind of banked out and leaned in, way different setups are going to enable those people to be way different levels of successful. And so it's really rad to hear that, because it comes down at the end of the day to the individual and figuring out what fits that person. And it's really cool.
Another piece that comes to mind there with equipment and how that affects controlling tilt, inclination, angulation. And speaking of rental equipment, stiff boots and how that affects the ankle joint and the ability. I think about breaking in a brand new pair of boots, how different it feels rolling onto your toe edge with a brand new stiff pair of boots. And many of our students are in a stiffer boot out of the rental shop, right? And that lack of an ankle joint really makes a difference in how you control tilt on the toe side. I just think of all those times where you end up feeling it almost feel like you're edge high, or you just don't have that ability to flex into the toe side to create tilt. And as soon as you start moving, the board's up on edge. And so many of our students are dealing with that on the toe edge just because of the boots right out of the shop.
Yeah, we always say check their boots, make sure you tighten them up. But in some cases, you may want to loosen them, to get more flex of the ankles. I think we've, fallen into that trap before. We're in new hire training, always check their boots, make sure it's all laced up tight, but maybe not. I mean, some great advice, Chris gave me, he's loosen them up. loosen those stiff boots up, get some more flex so you break them in. I think it'd be good. I kind of want to segue the conversation. I think it'd be amiss if we didn't talk about the difference between this fundamental and another fundamental. You know what I'm talking about? You know what I'm talking about.
This. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of teased it earlier, but I think there can be some confusion around, how we create pressure along or across the width of the board and its relationship to tilt and inclination angulation. Who wants to jump in to start that one?
Yeah, I'll jump in with that one. And it almost kind of brings me to the point I was just talking about a little bit with the forward lean piece. Is my thought process on the ability to manage pressure across the width of the snowboard versus creating inclination angulation to help manage tilt is how much I move between across the board to, without affecting necessarily tilt. So for example, to the point with forward lean is like, yeah, I ride a softer boot. Yeah, I ride with no forward lean. And I have all this adjustment, all this movement I have to save myself and manage pressure, either, more towards the toes, more towards the center of the foot, or more towards the heel of the foot before I increase or decrease the tilt of the board. So all of that movement is what I'm using to save myself in several situations, whether that's, through a carved turn, through a skidded turn, or kink on a rail, or whatever it might be, right? But absolutely, that in my opinion is the way I show it. Especially like today at a level 1 exam, I'm like, okay, look, I have all this range of movement across my board, and it's not changing my board, but it's definitely changing the pressure point underneath my foot and therefore underneath my board.
Yeah, Tone, I'm going to jump on that. And that last part you talked about is that idea of like, we've seen those commercials where like, I don't even know what it is. It's like different types of feet. And like, if you're standing, what part of your foot is the dark red and what part are you standing on? And then what parts aren't you really like bounced on or putting pressure on? And I think of that so much about how I kind of roll from like toes to heel in my boot. And, I ride my boots super loose because I like the ability to feel my ankle kind of flex and move around on the base of my foot without getting performance out of my snowboard. And it's that idea of being on a rail or a box and being able to like squish my ankle and move my center mass a little bit like more over the toe edge or more over the heel edge, but not try to ramp it up onto on an edge and try to just move back and forth. And I think of it as like little moments in time of adjusting where I am above my board before I get performance that is tilt or performance that's really like getting it up on an edge. And so I think of it as that like little sections of like a sequence of moments in time of how I move across the width and where my body is across the width. And it really is just adjusted by kind of how I roll, from the ball of the foot to the heel and through the arch and on the different parts of the foot. And so it's that anticipation right before I want to get performance of tilt.
I think your skateboard analogies are right on there, Donovan. And I'll kind of pull into the snow skating world here. And kind of one way I like to simplify this out or kind of explain it to folks is, if you take a snow skate or a skateboard, right, you can move your feet around, right? They can slide. You can move your feet towards the toe side edge. You can move your feet towards the heel side edge, right? That's, to me, what's really happening when we talk about the lateral pressure, right? And managing our pressure from toe side to heel side, right? As we're doing that, we can still create tilt, right? And so you think about creating tilt. If I'm on my snow skate and both my toes are hanging off the toe side edge and my heels are in the middle of the snow skate, I can still ride the snow skate. Might not look real pretty, right? But I can still kind of manage tilt, but I'm just going to be real heavy on that toe side all the time, right? Versus if I'm on my snowboard, I don't have the ability to change the position of my feet. So like you and Tony are saying, it's a much more subtle movement when we talk about that lateral movement of our center of mass, because it really is just kind of rolling, from your toes to your heels and kind of maybe around on your foot just a little bit, but I'll kind of add to your points as well that yes, that's precise. But even if you think about it, like if you're in a big kind of laid out carve, but you're coming into a carve, you can still change that lateral pressure to direct all of that pressure towards, say, the front of your toe side edge, and use that as a takeoff point. You know, in skateboarding, you might think about loading up your trucks and trying to push off one of the wheels, right? And you can do that if you're coming in off of, you know, a fair bit of tilt through inclination and angulation, and then you can add in that lateral pressure to create that pop at the moment of takeoff. So that's kind of how I like to think about it, is just, you know, using a little bit of that skateboard analogy.
I think this is one of the areas where we love our shorthand and describing lateral pressure or describing tilt, and the full fundamentals really help clarify these two. So control tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation. Actually, control the board's tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation, right? It's all about tilt, controlling tilt. That fundamental involves flexing and extending. It involves the ability to incline into the hill and how many angles in your body are you using to balance while you're doing so, but it's all about controlling the board's tilt. And the lateral fundamental is control the relationship of the center of mass to the base of support to direct pressure across the width, right? So thinking about the finish of a turn, the center of mass is still inside that, say, that heel turn. And the relationship between the base of support and the center mass has to change to get the center mass inside the new turn. So it's all about controlling that relationship, not just about the pressure and where it is on the board, but controlling the relationship between the center mass and the base of support. So that could be through in a, you know, a up and weighted or a most extended at edge change turn, moving the center mass over the board. And in through that, everything you guys are talking about, you would see that scale change, or you would see that truck turn on the skateboard, right? Or move across. Or it could be through a retraction turn where you're pulling the snowboard underneath you, but you're changing that relationship of the center mass and the base of support to move that pressure across. And so they are happening at times simultaneously, right? At some point, you're releasing pressure off that edge as you start to roll to the new edge, as you're decreasing tilt. So they're kind of happening simultaneously for a bit of it. Board goes flat, and there's a moment where you're actually moving pressure across the width of the snowboard. But again, it goes back to that controlling the relationship piece is that key word in the fundamental.
Good point, Chris. When I think about it, I think of like a board slide on a box or a rail, and the board performance stays tilt, right, where I don't want to get it on edge and I need to keep it flat. But it's the pressure across the width that really matters, and where my center of mass is in relation to the board, the base, the edge, so that I can stay on top of my board and not have it slip out.
Yeah, Amy, I love that you're putting it in freestyle, and you're talking about that sensation of what we always talk about, getting forward and, you know, a backside board slide, and it has nothing to really do with trying to not it has everything to do with trying to not tilt, but it has everything really to do with where you are above the snowboard to not get the board to tilt. And then Chris, to your point, you said it earlier when you were talking about the roll into a Euro carve. You talked about being super low at the initiation of the turn, and then like slowly, like almost rolling the volume knob up into that big like incline position, right? And then now when you're talking about controlling that relationship, now what you're talking really about is as you're coming through the end of that Euro carve, you're making a move where then you're moving back across the width of the board, whether you want to be low to get into like a heel side Euro carve or whatever, but you're at this like super laid out Euro carve, and then you need to make a move to basically start to release the edge, start to move across the board so that you can then get to the new edge. And so it's so cool how it's linked with that idea of like low, roll on the volume knob of incline, you know, more and more and more. Awesome, like, you know, magazine, like center shot, fully Euro carve, but then there has to be a move to get back above the board and kind of control where you are above the board so that you aren't just gonna like forever go into a slide for life on your belly. So it's super rad that it's that idea of like, how do I get out there? And then how do I start to like work myself back above the board to get into the next turn?
As we talk more and more about this, I'm like trying to condense that message. Like what's the 10-second description of pressure across the board versus inclination and angulation, that combination of that to manage tilt. And I think I've had a light bulb that I'm going to share here. And it's like for our fundamental in managing tilt, our combination of inclination and angulation, it's like looking at your body and all the joints and muscles and how they trickle down to what's under your feet and manipulating your board versus the pressure piece of how do how do your movements of muscles and joints relate and manipulate your center of mass in relation to that board? Did that make any sense? Like down to the feet versus manipulating your middle? Oh, there, clean that up.
Close. Yeah. Less words.
Yeah.
I thought it was going to be 4 words.
I got to 6.
That's good. I'm still processing.
It's fresh for me too.
Can you say that again?
No.
Yes. Yeah. If you could say it again, we know it's simple enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pressure on. Okay. Yeah. So like movements directed to what's under our feet versus manipulating our body towards our middle.
Okay.
Yep.
Just a thought. I really wanted.
We're getting
to,
there. We're getting there.
Wanted to share with that one. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
I'll,
something really
I'll call for 10
interesting-
seconds of silence now.
Let it simmer.
Something really interesting about this fundamental is how it relates to the Alpine fundamental on inclination angulation. And in the Alpine world, you know, their ideal is directing pressure to the outside ski, which requires angulation to do well. And the difference for us being, we can have a really clean turn with a lot of inclination and not much angulation, where to them that, you know, that banking, if you just incline into the hill, it's taking pressure off your downhill ski. So reducing the effectiveness of your pressure distribution. So it's kind of cool the way, like the fundamentals are written very similar, but in the Alpine side, one of those is a less ideal outcome, whereas for us it's that combination, and both are great.
I'm glad you said banking, Chris. I'm not going to go into it right now. That's another conversation for another evening, I think. But
you're going to bake that for later.
Sounds like he's been studying for his Alpine cert too.
Interesting conversations to be had around banking for a later date.
Well, and just to keep those similarities, right? Us moving across the width of the board is similar to Alpine moving ski to ski. It's a different plane of motion, but we're trying to get from an edge across to a different edge or to a different piece of gear with a different edge. And it's pretty rad when you start to just kind of look at the end of the day, how are we trying to get our gear to interact with the snow? We might move differently to get it to happen, but we're creating kind of common themes of how we want to make it happen. I think that sets us up real rad for one of the next videos that we can go a little bit further. We're going to give Larson some time to really dial in his 6-word, 10-second shorthand so that we can all digest it and he can repeat it 8 times. And this is kicking off a whole series breaking down the fundamentals and talking about them in our riding, talking about them in our teaching as a team, as individuals. This one is control the board's tilt through a combination of inclination and angulation. This is the AASI Snowboard National Team. We hope that you guys enjoyed this session, and there's going to be a series of these coming out, and we're going to kind of dissect each fundamental individually, and so stay tuned and keep your ears to the ground and go out and play with the stuff that you heard tonight and see if you can replicate it and get the same sensations, and then come up with your own ideas of how it makes sense to you, and then come back and revisit this and see how it relates to what we've been talking about. So, if you made it this far, thank you for hanging out, and stay tuned for more.
If you made it this far, you should definitely be coming to Rider Rally at Big Sky in the spring.
Do it.
We'll play with some inclination.
I'm so excited. I have our itinerary planned for everyone. So register. We'll see you at Rider Rally, folks.
Yep.